right, everyone, let's conclude these notes about how Europeans colonized the Americas. And I am going to go ahead and apologize because I know the last two pages, England and the Dutch, I have that printed on 2 pages, so you may just need to kind of flip back and forth. I'll try to point that out as I get to each section. All right. So when does England get into this colonization competition with Spain and France? They attempt a colony, their first colony in 1585, lasting colony in 1585. And Cabot does journey to way up north in Canada in 1497. But they tried to establish this colony in Roanoke near the Carolinas in 1585, and that is a big historical mystery. And I may play you a brief video about that because the colony essentially just disappears. And we don't know for certain what happened to it. And then in 1607, a couple decades later, that's when they establish the Jamestown colony that we have been reading about for the last week. Now, the Dutch, and I want to say just a quick note about the Dutch. The Netherlands is the modern word for this nation state up here, the Netherlands. We would call people from the Netherlands, we call them Dutch. So maybe you have Dutch heritage because your ancestors are from the Netherlands. And so that can be a little confusing, but that's what I'm referring when I say the Dutch, I'm referring to the kingdom up here and people from this nation state now called the Netherlands. And then England, this one is a little more complicated, but England is the name of a country within Britain, the British Isles. And Britain is a part of the United Kingdom. And in 2023, the United Kingdom is made up of a couple different countries. Those are Northern Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland. I think that's it. I hope I'm not missing any. But those are the countries that make up the United Kingdom. So if you heard last year about the Queen Elizabeth II dying and her son, who is now King Charles III, taking the crown, he is the king over all 4 of those countries and the king of the United Kingdom. And things get a little tricky there. But when I'm talking about England at this time, I may say the English, I may say the British. At this moment in 1607, Scotland was a part of this crown. The English had essentially kind of like merged the Scottish crown or the Scottish kingdom into the English kingdom under King James. So it's just a little confusing, and I don't expect you to know that, but I just wanted to explain that. So the Dutch, the significant piece of the Dutch exploration was when Henry Hudson for the Dutch explores the Hudson River in 1621, and the colony of New Netherlands are established in 1621, and they are the first actual European colony that claims what is now New York City as New Amsterdam. They call it New Amsterdam. So it's in Dutch control. Obviously, first it's in indigenous control, then it is under control of the Dutch, and then later on it was under British control. Same thing with France. Their motivation for England on this side, this box, England's motivation is to compete with Spain, with France. Initially, they're looking for gold in the Americas. They think that they'll be able to find gold like the Spanish. And when that doesn't go well for them in Jamestown, they realized that there's a lot of profit that can be made from growing cash crops like tobacco and selling it back in Europe and then trading all around the world, Africa, Asia. So tobacco drives that expansion and their presence in what they call the New World. And the Dutch, similarly with the French, also are interested in establishing a role in the fur trade. There's a big part of the Dutch colonization story that allows European people who cannot practice their religion freely to find and fund space for them in the Americas. And a lot of time what would happen would be religious pilgrims or exiles, basically from England or other places, France. They would kind of stop in the Netherlands and in the Dutch kingdom, stay there for a while until they could figure out where they should go in the Americas. And an example of that would be the Pilgrims that you know about from the Thanksgiving story, maybe. All right, where, in what region? So England, very early on, they establish territory in Newfoundland up there in northern Canada. But then for England, mostly the long-standing, I'm going to jump back here, the long-standing colonies are on the east coast of the Americas, modern-day United States. So they're represented by the purple here. And Virginia is in the mid-Atlantic southern area of these colonies. And the Dutch, you can see it's just a real small sliver up here, first in this part of New York or along the Hudson River. And that does not last long term, their control over that colony. Okay, how do they treat Native peoples? So we've talked a little bit about this with Pocahontas and the Powhatan people, but the Virginia Company, they initially have these poor relationships with the Powhatan people. There are those series of wars over the first 10 years. We know the John Smith story, Pocahontas story. It's really something to note that they ignore the guidance of Indigenous people who potentially might say, okay, we're trading with you and we also want to give you this advice that this weather is coming and there's the potential for this to happen to your crops that you have never planted before. In a lot of cases, they ignore that guidance and to their detriment. And that's how they lose a lot of people in the initial years of those colonies. And that's unlike the French, who had that business partner relationship sort of with the Indigenous Native people and were more willing at least to learn. And again, those men that they recruited on those trips, they were tradesmen. We just discussed a lot of times they were young teenage boys. They were not farmers. And so that was hard for them to sustain life. And also there were like no women at the beginning of these England establishing these colonies. So that made it hard to sustain life and to continue communities without women, obviously. Let's see. Oh, this is the notable story about New Amsterdam is that the Dutch, they offer to buy the island of Manhattan, which is where, like on Monday, on September 11th, this is where the Freedom Tower is. This is where the Twin Towers were, down here at the bottom of this island. It was Indigenous land. And the Dutch offered to buy this land from the Indigenous people for pots, blankets, and glass beads. Historians like to total it like $24. And Native Indigenous people, they didn't have that code or the belief that really land could be owned by humans for these material goods. So they were just sort of like, okay, yeah, we'll take this. Again, major simplification there, but that is why the Dutch initially think that they control Manhattan. And I think Manhattan is also an Indigenous word. So they call that first colony New Amsterdam. And it's not until the English take control of the island, that it's renamed New York. Amsterdam is a city in the Netherlands. York is a city in England. It's just called New York, New Amsterdam. All right, so they ally themselves also with the Iroquois, or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. All right, what is the legacy for England? What language have I been speaking all year? What language is this video in? I am speaking English in this language, and that is one of the biggest legacies of English exploration of the Americas, because the English speak English, so we are speaking English today. And they also bring, I'm trying to find where this is, the legacy here, the legacy. They also bring their government, cultural practices to the Americas. Eventually, they established the 13 colonies that we'll talk about maybe a little more next month. And that is the major lasting legacy on the continent. And then the Dutch, one of the things the Dutch do is they really firmly establish the value for religious freedom, practicing religious freedom without the fear that a government is going to punish you for practicing your religion or no religion at all, which is a core part of our Constitution. We can draw some of our influence from that, the Dutch influence there. These are just some major explorers that I want you to know. So John Cabot for England, the Virginia Company overall, and for the Dutch, Henry Hudson, who was actually English, but he sailed for the Netherlands and he discovers the Hudson River. Similarly to how Columbus was actually born in the Italian kingdom or states and principalities or whatever it was called, but he sailed for Spain. And I believe that is all. So we have wrapped this up. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone.